so I have the flap all done. And now what I need to do is start working on the fringe of the bag. And so what I need to do is select one of these for the front. And I typically choose, these are pretty much identical, but if there is a difference, I choose the least attractive piece for the front because usually it has a flap or lots of decoration of some sort, and the back is usually more plain and more visible, so I save the prettiest piece for the back. So this is what I've selected, and now I need to start working on the fringe. Okay, so I'm going to have lots of different fringe for this bag, but I'm going to start by cutting up some suede fringe. Now, I thrifted these two jackets, and when I got them home, I washed them. I made lots of leather and suede fringe purses over the years, and it would have cost me a lot of money to take these to the dry cleaner and clean them. But I find a lot of times with leather and suede, they don't get cleaned that often because it is expensive to clean them. So when you get them, a lot of times they have odors, and you can't really, I don't want to carry around a bag with a weird odor, or you definitely can't sell it with odors. So I experimented one day and I threw them in my washer to see what would happen. I'm cutting them up anyway. So it worked. These have been washed in my washer and dried. Now, I wash them in cold water and I dry them in the dryer. If you line dry them, they tend to get stiff. So I throw them in the dryer. And now and then, I do it with leather and suede. And sometimes suede will get like a weird watermark. You cut around it. These are cutters anyway. If it's something you want to wear or sell, don't wash it in your washer and dryer. This is just for crafts. So I'll show you how I disassemble these and cut the fringe. Okay, first of all, I keep this sitting right next to me when I'm planning fringe because as I get different pieces of fringe cut, I lay them under the bag, or what will be the bag, just to make sure everything's coordinating and looking nice. So this will stay there. And now, as far as deconstructing these leather coats, I want to create panels of suede that I can cut with a roller to make the fringe. So I cut the sleeve off. I try to stay around the seams. Now, I use this rechargeable battery electric scissors. It's Pink Power electric scissors. If you've noticed that weird dark spot on my arm, I have really bad tendonitis. That's where I get cortisone shots. And this saves my wrist when I have to cut suede or leather or a lot of repetitive cut strips, things like that. So I will cut the sleeves off around the seam. Now I have a shoulder pad here I need to cut through. Okay, anyway, I'll get through that shoulder pad. Okay, and then I cut across the shoulder here. There's a seam there. And I'm going to just cut right into the collar. I rarely use the collars for anything, so I just keep cutting straight across. I got some lining here. Okay, cut the arm off, cut across the shoulder, and then once I cut this all open, I can open that up. And then the sleeve, I will cut the seam. Now on the sleeve, there's always like a longer side and a shorter side. I cut on the shorter side, the seam. And get that opened up as well. Okay, and then I'll get this lining removed and clean it up a little bit and I'll come back. Now I have things cleaned up pretty good. What I want to do is just cut out some panels. And that just means, for me, pieces of suede without seams. You can't cut fringe over seams because they'll just break apart. So I am just going to find some seams. Here's a seam down the middle. I'm going to cut down one side and then down the other. Well, there's a little stitch here, so I have to go around it. And just cut out panels that are clean and free of seams, lining, things like that. So I'll kind of get this cut up so I have some nice clean panels like that. Now I want my fringe to be about 10 inches long. I generally do 10 to 12 inches, but I've done 6. And I've done fringe to the floor. Back when I used to do custom orders, I had a lady that wanted me, I made her 2 purses, and she wanted a shoulder bag with fringe to the floor. And for that, a jacket doesn't work. You need like a trench coat, so you have long pieces of fringe without seams in it, like a trench coat, a skirt or pants, something like that. But I just want 10-inch fringe. So this is all jagged, different heights. I am going to cut approximately 10 inches across. I'm going to make a line, make them straight 10 inches, because I think it looks better when they're uneven, the fringes at the bottom, and more wispy rather than like blunt. So this probably ranges from 9.5 to 10.5. So they're not perfectly 10 inches, but that's exactly what I want. So this is about all I need. If I was doing an all suede fringe purse, I would need a lot more than that. But since this is collage fringe, that should suffice. And now I'm just going to deconstruct this and get some panels, and then I'll show you how I cut the fringe. Now my panels cut into approximately 10 inches tall. Now I'm just going to lay a piece on this cutting mat, and this straight edge and this rotary cutter all came in a set, and it was pretty affordable. I'm going to put a link to that in my description too. It's just a nice set to have. So my rotary cutter, first I'm going to just clean that edge. It's all crooked, so I have a nice clean edge. And then I do not measure this. I just scoot my straight edge over about 1/4 inch and cut a piece of fringe. And I just keep doing that until I have enough. Now, as I cut it, I will be laying it next to my little bag here. So I don't know how many exactly I'll cut. I always just eyeball it and see what I like. I have plenty more leather fringe or the suede if I want more, but I'm just starting with a few pieces here. Okay, so I will just cut away the green and this pink until I feel I have enough. Whoops. Okay, so I kind of have my fringes laid out here. This is the only way I can visualize how it's going to look with the bag, is just to lay it out with the bag. And I can always tell right away, oh boy, I need some more pink, or I really need a little orange, or this and that. Okay, so I have the suede done. I may or may not add more. I'll just have to see how it goes. But now I'm going to work on cutting up some lace for it. Okay, so now I am going to cut up some lace for the fringe. And I had these 2 pieces. They're kind of a teal color. I'll have to cut these all around 10 inches. Now I dyed these. Okay, but you can find colored lace pretty inexpensively, actually. I think it's cheaper than like white and ecru lace. I don't think it's as popular, but it makes gorgeous fringe. But I dyed mine. Now, I have lots of tutorials talking about RIT dye, and I use RIT dye for natural fabrics. I dye things in my wash machine, And a lot of people are scared to do that, but after I dye something, I do a hot, empty, soapy load to wash my machine, and then the next load of laundry that I do won't be whites, it'll be like darks. Now, I used petal pink, half a bottle of petal pink, and about a third a bottle of wine Rit dye for this color. And I used dark green, about half a bottle, and about maybe a fifth of a bottle of yellow for this color. Now, Rit dye, I just found out, has a color chart. I think you could probably Google it, of what colors to mix to get what colors, which colors. So how I dye these in my wash machine is I put the dye in, the mixture that I want, a cup of salt. When I have a really small load, I just do like half a cup of salt. I let my washer fill up for 5 minutes. I put my lace in, let it run through the cycle, and then I put mine in the dryer. Typically, you don't want doilies and things in the dryer. But let me know if you have any questions on that. I talk about it in so many tutorials. I feel like I don't want to sort of bore you with that. But anyway, colored lace. Okay, now it's time to cut the lace. And I get a lot of concerns about cutting lace. A lot of people think if you cut into this crochet and this lace, it's going to completely unravel. It really, really doesn't. And you would be surprised how well it holds together. So I am lining my lace at the top of my board here, and I have 10 inches right there. It says 10 inches. So I'm just going to cut these over to the 10-inch mark. Okay, so now I have these two panels 10 inches tall, and then I am going to cut about 1-inch strips. I don't want to cut too much thinner than that, or they will break apart. And sometimes I test them to see if they're going to break apart. And if you stretch them, you're going to have to remeasure to make sure they're 10 inches. Let's see. Okay, anyway, I'm getting 10-inch strips of lace, approximately 10 cut. And I'll do that to this. And a doily, you know, that's not 10 inches tall. So what I'll have to do is cut it around and circle. And then I'll have a big long piece when I'm done, and I'll just cut that into 10-inch pieces. And I also have this ecru color. I'll have to test it and see if I like it. I think I'll want a little, I don't want to risk using too much of this because, let me show you the purse. The purse is basically kind of dark. And if I add too much of this, the lace isn't going to match. I'll have like this whitish looking lace and this dark purse. But a little of it would probably be really pretty because I have some of this gold color in the flowers in my purse. So I'll cut up some of these. I'll get this cut up and laid on top of this suede fringe and show you what it looks like. Okay, so now I have the lace laid out. Now the lace takes over and you don't really see the suede, but when you sew this all on, you see the mixture of lace and suede. This just gives me an idea of the fullness and the colors. Now I have this mauve piece of fringe. I think I'll use that somewhere. I won't use too much, maybe 1 or 2 pieces. Because when it's laying up vertical like this, it's not as thick. When you lay it down like this, it looks kind of thick. But that just gives it a different texture. Let's see what else we can find. Okay, so I have this kind of black and white gimp trim. Now, that's not really the color. Well, that's probably too curly. It's not going to lay nice anyway. I was going to say black and white pretty much goes with everything, even though there's not black in this. But I have some of this burgundy fringe. I'm going to cut basically into 10-inch pieces. Okay, so I went to my messy yarn stash. And I am going to make some yarn braids. And these are what I have that I think will go, sort of a burgundy, a gold, a green, and this brownish, which you wouldn't think, but let me show you. It seems to work with the bag. So I'll use that. And then I have some pink. So I am just going to do all different combinations of colors for braids. Now, I started with this one. So I had two pieces. I'm cutting them 12 to 13 inches long. My fringe is 10. So by the time you tie the knot and it shrinks up from the braid, it should be about right. So maybe about 13 inches, because you can always trim that. So I have a couple pieces of gold, couple burgundy, and about 4 of the green, because that's a super skinny. So I'm going to tie a little knot, and I'm going to go find my hook on the wall, and I am just going to make a braid. And then I'm just going to continue making different colored braids, various yarns, and lay them on here, lay them on my purse, and see what I'm liking, see what I'm not liking, see how many I want. So I'm just going to start making braids. Okay, so here are the braids I made. Some are fat, some are skinny, different combinations of yarn. I have 15 of them. So keep in mind, I am just working on the design right now, just trying to make sure I have all the materials that I like. Now I'm just going to start adding the braids to make sure I like them. And I did this earlier, and I definitely do like them, but I wanted you to see sort of this design process. And I'll just keep laying them down in various areas until I don't have any more left. See, doesn't that change things? It just adds just kind of movement and texture. Now these suede fringe, on different styles of bags, I've added beads, I've added feathers, all kinds of stuff. Okay, so that's what the braids are looking like. Now I have some more stuff I want to add. Okay, so I just have this little wispy fringe. I have more, but I think I just want to add a tiny bit, just for a little bit of color that kind of ties in with this light color. I don't want too much light color in the fringe. Okay, and so now I have a bunch of necklaces I want to add. And I'll show you, of course, how I sew all this on, but I have this necklace. It's kind of a fabric with little sequins. It still has the lobster claw. And so maybe I'll lay that down. And it's too long, so I'm just going to clip that. And then I have a whole stash, a tub of broken chains that I use on bags. And so, and just like unattractive chains that I wouldn't wear. So I wouldn't wear this one. It's just kind of not me. But this would be, so we got all this pretty gold in the flap. And I want to kind of draw your eye down into the bag with that gold. And so I've got this chain. I will have to snip it and clip it. Show you all of that in a bit. I've got this chain. Now, when you add embellishments like chains and jewelry, you have to be very careful to not make it too heavy. I did that in the beginning years of making my bags. I had no concern what I put on there as far as the weight. And boy, some of these bags got heavy, like over 4 pounds. Well, that just wasn't practical. I had to disclose the weight and all of that. So now I'm just very careful that I don't put too much on, or what I put on is lightweight. Okay, so I think I'm good with the fringe. And now it's time to assemble it. Okay. So what do I do with all of these, right? So I first off am going to take off the chains, because I will sew those on differently than I do the rest of the fringe. So I'm just going to take the chains off. and set them aside. Okay, and now I know that I sort of have this balanced. I have the leather fringe balanced, the braids, you know, not too many over here. So I kind of like how this is looking. So I'm just carefully going to take little chunks off of here and lay them, like I'm going to use my cutting mat. I'm just going to lay them sort of just how I have it here, so that everything so I'll take this to my sewing machine. This whole mat, I have a chair sitting next to my sewing machine, and I'll just take this over, and I have these pretty much all lined up how I want them. So you don't have to be super careful, just try to keep the composition that you had. I copied that word composition. Somebody wrote to me about my composition, and it reminded me of being in art class in school, and that's right. This is sort of a composition. Okay, so I'll get this all laid out and come back. Now I'm just deciding where I want my chains on the bag. I will sew my chains on first. That will make them be on top of the fringe. If you start putting the chains on with the fringe, I didn't put them in this pile up here, they just get buried. So I always put them on first. That way they're on top of the fringe and more noticeable. Now, I want my fringe to be approximately 10 inches long, like everything else. Now see, this is a lot longer. And what I'll need to do is just go to, if it's a thin chain, I'll just use a wire cutters and clip it off. If it's a thick chain, I'll have to use my 2 jewelry making needle nose pliers and pry a link apart. So for example, this one, there's the 10-inch mark. I'm going to just take a link. So there's a link. I'm just going to pop it open. Now this is really thick links, so sometimes they're harder to get open. And I'll just remove part of it to make it the 10 inches that I need. And now this one is thin enough that I can just use my wire cutters. Now there's 2 links I have to cut through here. Okay, and so that's what I'll have to do to the rest of it. Just make my 10-inch links. So to attach these chains to the bag, I need some sort of cording. It needs to be thin enough to fit through a lot of these like little clasps, but thick enough to be durable on a purse that gets carried around and knocked around. Thread I don't think would be strong enough. So what is this? This is just some sort of nylon 1/8 inch red cording. I just tried to find something that was similar to the color of the bag. So most of these have an area that's large enough for this cording to go through, like these lobster claw, but some don't. Like this one, I won't be able to really fit that through there. So what I need to do is I have these jewelry making jump rings, and they're real simple. And I will just need 2 sort of jewelry making pliers. You know, I can put this stuff in my description if you want it or curious about it. Now, I always talk about the tips you guys gave me. I got a message from one of my viewers saying I'm doing this wrong. I always opened my jump rings in my videos like this, just pulled it apart. And she said, don't do that because that weakens the jump ring. She said, see, I'm kind of a jack of all trades, a master of none. So I love learning from you masters about these different little tricks and tips. Now, I hope you can see that ring. Instead, she said, twist it to the side a little bit instead of pulling it apart. So that's what I'm doing here. I learned something new and I love it. And then I'm just going to butt that back together. Now, that hole is plenty big enough to slip my cording through. Okay, so I will sew the chains on first. And I don't need this flap anymore. That was just so I can visualize the design. So what I need to do is this, along with the fringe, is all going to be sewn inside the bag. Okay, everything will be up here and out of the way, and I sew it on like this, sort of like we did the fringe on the flap. So what I need to do is, let me put these back. First of all, I like, if this fabric wasn't so plush and hard to mark on, I might make a little dot just right where I want every single piece of chain. But this would just, the marker would just sort of disappear in the fuzz. So I am going to mark with a pen. You can just eyeball yours. I've done this before, but usually when I have more, when I have sort of just a small amount, I want them to be evenly dispersed. So I'm just sticking a straight pin at the top of each chain so I remember where I want to sew them on. Okay, and so I'll do that all the way over to this chain. Now what I need to do is take this cording, and I have lots of it, so I am going to cut, let me find my scissors. Okay. They need to go through these holes, and I am going to cut like 5 inches off. I need 7 of them. I don't need near that much, but since I have plenty, if I cut them real small, the size I need, I'm working with a very tedious small. I don't like tedious, so I cut them nice and big so my fingers don't have to fumble around with tiny things. And so I'll give you an example. I'll start with this middle chain. It doesn't really matter. When I'm sitting at my machine is where I do this. Actually, okay, let's pretend I'm sitting at my machine. I would put this in the machine about right here, right where I want to sew that first chain on. Okay, so there's my pin. I would maybe start 1/4 of an inch in and about an inch away from the very first pin and put it in my machine and get ready to go on a straight stitch. And then I'll take, say, this chain. I'll take one of my pieces of cord. I'll slip it through the clasp or the ring or hole, whatever I have, and I'll double it up like this. And as I'm sewing, when I get to that first pin, I will lay this where I want it, and I will just stitch over it. Now, give yourself a good 1/2 inch because you don't want this metal to interfere with your needle and your presser foot. So 1 inch to a 1/2 inch, whatever you're comfortable with, and just sew over that cord. And then keep on sewing to your next pin. I should have just pinned all these at once. That way I wouldn't have to keep stopping here. Let me get those pinned. Those are just my markers. Okay. And then when I get to the next pin, I'll stick the cording through the hole, double it, lay the chain on the inside of the bag, and the bottom of the necklace about 1 inch, between 1/2 inch and 1 inch. It really doesn't matter as long as you're missing it with your sewing machine and needle. And then sew over top of that. And then eventually all these chains will be sewed on and inside the bag. Okay, but I'll take you to my machine and I'll let you watch me do it. Okay, so to take it to the machine, what I do is I'll get some sort of surface. I'll use this lid, and I'm going to lay them down in the order I want to sew them. So this one first, then this one, then this one. So then I remember where I wanted them. I'll take my little pile of cords, take this over to my machine, take this to my machine, and get them sewn on. Okay, so I'm down on the side, an inch away from that first pin, and I'm just going to go forward stitch, back stitch, about 1/4 of an inch in. And now I'm going to take my first necklace, slip that cording through. These will all be trimmed at the end, so okay, so I slip that through. I'm just going to take my pin out where I had marked it, and I'm just going to go over it with my sewing machine, and I'm going to back stitch to make that durable so it doesn't slip out. And I'm just going to cruise around. Here's my next pin right here. I'm going to take that out, grab my next chain, put my cord through, double it up, go over it, go back over it so it's durable, and move over to my next pin, and just keep doing that until I'm out of chains. Now this is what they look like all sewn on. Now see, I still have plenty of room here to stitch. I need to stitch the bag together. I need to sew fringe. I want to stay far enough away from that edge that I have plenty of room to sew. And now I can just clip off those extra pieces of cording. Okay, so here's what it's looking like so far with the chains. Okay, so to sew the fringe on, there's really no easy way or hack to do it except sew it on one by one if you want a full fringe look. If you want it more wispy, there are easier ways, I suppose, to do it, but I like to overlap and make it very full. So what I'll do is just make sure these chains are all up and out of the way, and I'll pretend I'm at a machine here. I'll start 1 inch down, and I'll come in 1/4 of an inch, just like it's with my needle, just like I did these. Now, don't overthink the placement of these. It will take you forever. I just start grabbing and throwing on. If I have it laid out generally the way I want it, it turns out just fine and beautiful. So, for example, I'll grab the first one I see here, and it's this braid. I will lay it 1 inch down. My needle's already in. The knot is on the outside. I'll clip that off when I'm done sewing all the fringe on, and I'll just sew over top of it. Now, I will do the sides and the bottom a little differently. The bottom, I will overlap each one a lot. Now on the sides, because of the way it hangs down, it gets very full very fast. If you overlap here, you're going to have a really wide, fluffy kind of purse. If that's the look you're going for, that's fine. But I found if I sew these about 1 inch apart, so I'll sew over the braid, keep sewing, lay another one down, sew over top, maybe find a piece of fringe, lay it down, just lay down as I go. I only want these about 1 inch apart until I get to about this first chain. As it's straight, when it starts to curve, that's when you want to start overlapping. Okay, so I'll just keep laying down. And again, I'll take you to my machine and sort of so you can get more of a visual of me actually doing it. Okay, so now about here, I'm going to want to start overlapping because that's where it's curving. and I will sew over it like this piece halfway, put my needle in, lift up my presser foot, lay another one down about halfway. And I really overlap these, and this is a little time consuming, but not as terrible as you might think. And I'll sew over that part way, and then maybe I'll lay a braid down overlapping that. I will overlap all of these, so then maybe a piece of lace. All the way till I get to here, and then I'll start spacing them again about an inch apart. Okay, I'm at my machine. I have my fringes sitting here next to me. Now, if my table was longer, I'd have them sitting right here on my table, but this always works for me. So I'm going to take my bag, the front of my bag here, and here's the straight top right there. I'm going to put it under my needle about 1 inch down, and I'm kind of just lining the side of my presser foot up with the edge of the bag. That gives me about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to go forward and back just to lock that in. Then I'm going to make sure my needle is in, and I'm going to lift up my presser foot and put my first piece of fringe, which is this braid. The knot is on the outside of the presser foot. I'm just going to sew over it. Go about an inch, make sure my needle is in, lift up my presser foot, and I'll stick a piece of lace under there. So over that, stick my needle in, lift up my presser foot. I think I'll do green. Lay it down. And I'll just keep doing that until I get to about here, and I have to overlap. I'm spacing these about an inch apart right now. Now I'm ready to overlap. I just laid a piece of off-white lace there, sewed halfway into it. And now I'm going to take a braid and just overlap that. And sew. Stick my needle in. Now braids are a little harder to overlap because they're thicker. So I'll take like a piece of fringe like this and just butt it up to it as tight as I can. And keep sewing. Stop before I'm all the way through the suede. Now this seems probably really tedious to you, but I've done this so much that it takes a little time, but get your coffee, just sit and relax. And now I have the chain there, and I have that cord completely out of the way of my presser foot, so I can just ignore that and continue on. Okay, I'll just keep sewing until I'm all the way up to the top on the opposite side. Okay, so this is what it looks like right now. I have all the fringe sewn on. Now I'm just going to go around and trim off anything that's sticking out past the body of the bag here. Okay, so here's what the fringe is looking like. Okay, now add the flap. You can really start to see at this point what the bag is starting to look like, how it's turning out. Okay, now I'm going to assemble the body of the bag and the flap, make a strap, and make the lining. Okay, I decided to add some orange. As I'm looking at this, I'm seeing that the fabric really shows a lot of orange, and I didn't put a lot of orange into my bag. So I'm just going to add a little bit more. Now I have this crazy basket of ribbons because I don't have any orange yarn. So this is what I decided to do. I found a ribbon like this. It has some orange in it. Now, we didn't sew all the way to the top, and there's a gap in between these two. So I will put all this fringe back up, go to my machine, and kind of re-sew, and I'll show you that in a second. But so that little orangey piece will go there. I have sort of this orange ribbon that I'm going to put there. Now, I have a whole cluster here of ribbons like this, kind of a burnt orange and kind of a bright orange. And I'm adding some brown just to sort of diffuse that bright orange. Now, I will put this all together in a cluster like this, and I will take it to my machine, and I'm going to remove that for a second, and I'm going to sew it right here about 3 inches up from the bottom of the bag, and it will lay in front of the fringe like this. So about 3 inches up from the bottom, off center, and I'm just going to put like 3 stitches over top of that so it's nice and secure. And then I'll show you when I'm done. I'll trim it, and then I'm going to put a little brooch over top of that to hide that unattractive stitching. Okay, so I have this piece of fringe, and then as I have it at my machine, I'm just going to sprinkle some more fringe throughout. So I will have to take it back to my machine and put all the fringe back up like this, and just sort of go all the way around it again, this time just adding some orange in different spots. Okay, now I'm happier with that. I've got just enough orange in there to make all those orange flowers in the fabric make sense. And this is what the little brooch and the little piece down on the side in the front here. Okay, now I'm ready to assemble the bag.